Hope you guys are having a good time. Things are changing slowly, but things remain the same. So if we talk about a lockdown, they're kind of loosening the lockdown in the UK here. People are going around a bit more, a bit freer. I think from tomorrow, Monday, they're saying that maybe 6 people can meet up and talk, yeah? But in the USA, unfortunately, the same runnings are going down. They're still killing black people, black men in the street, like it's nothing. So only it will continue until we decide to change our consciousness. I posted in a group today on Facebook that when they've checked the statistics for the people who are given fines for the lockdown in places, the highest amount of people that they're arresting and giving fines to are black people. So nothing really changes, yeah, but until we change ourselves, things are really going to stay the same. Okay. So anyway, we are on the last chapter now. We've been reading the book, Our Story, which is a collection of lectures, which was made in 1987 in London from many of our great scholars. And the last chapter is by Dr. Francis Cress Weldon, who passed away a couple of years ago now. So Dr. Francis Cress Weldon's famous book is called The ISIS Papers. It's a book we should all get a copy of. But this is a small chapter which she did when she was in London answering questions, yeah? So Dr. Francis Cress Weldon, and the chapter is called The White Supremacy System and the White Supremacy Mindset and the AIDS Holocaust. So I continue. I'm a practicing physician, and a psychiatric physician to be exact. A third-generation physician. My father was a physician, and his father was also a physician. Medicine, if it means anything to all, it means to ascertain the fundamental rock-bottom causation of disease. The fundamental cause of a given disease determines, ultimately, what must be done about it. Otherwise, one is treating various levels of symptoms of a disease. Sometimes a disease states itself, is a symptom of something else. AIDS, for example, is recognized as a disease, but AIDS may also be a symptom of yet another disease, and that must be determined. Thus, in relationship to the present pandemic caused by the AIDS virus, from my perspective, 4 questions must be raised for consideration at the very least and answered if at all possible. So question number 1, could a government, meaning a specific power entity, cause such a phenomenon as the present AIDS pandemic, in which 75 million plus deaths have been projected? Question number 2, would any government cause such a phenomenon, and why? Question number 3, are there any precedents of a government causing such massive levels of death? And question number 4, if indeed there are, or there is a precedent, are there any parallels between that precedent and the present AIDS phenomenon? So you must remember this is written in 1987 when the AIDS was recently kind of new and was very just spreading across the world, particularly among the black world particularly. The following is an extensive quotation from the book. The Destruction of European Jews by Raoul Hilberg, 1961. And the quote says from the book called Destruction of the European Jews, as time passes on, the destruction of the European Jews will recede into the background. Its most immediate consequences are almost over, and whatever developments may henceforth be traced to the catastrophe will be the consequences of consequences, more and more remote. Already the Nazi outburst has become historical. Already the Nazi outburst has become historical, but there is a strange page in history. Few events of modern times were so filled with unpredicted action and unsuspected death. A primordial impulse had suddenly surfaced among the Western nations. It had been unfettered through their machines. From this moment, fundamental assumptions about our civilizations have no longer stood unchallenged. For a while, the occurrence is past. The phenomenon remains. Before the emergence of the 20th century and its technology, a destructive mind could not play in fantasy with the thoughts that the Nazis were able to translate into action. The administrator of earlier centuries did not have the tools. He did not possess the network of communications. He did not dispose over rapid small arms fire and quick-working poison gases. The bureaucrat of tomorrow would not have these problems already. He is better equipped than the German Nazis were. Killing is not as difficult as it used to be. The modern administrative apparatus has facilities for rapid, concerted movements and for efficient, massive killings. These devices not only trap a larger number of victims, they also require a greater degree of specialization. Number of victims. They also require a greater degree of specialization and with that divisions of labor. The moral burden, too, is fragmented among the participants. The perpetrators can now kill his victims without touching them, without hearing them, without seeing them. He may feel sure of his success and safe from its repercussions. This ever-growing capacity for destruction cannot be arrested anywhere. We saw how the Nazis had built upon the experiences of the past. Now there are means which will allow still others to seize upon the Nazis' experience, so that in turn may yet become a precedent for the future. In the words of President Truman, I quote, "Hitler's persecution of the Jews did much to awaken Americans to the dangerous extremes to which prejudice can be carried if allowed to control government actions." Let me repeat that, thinking about what's happening in the USA today. Hitler's persecution of the Jews did much to awaken Americans to the dangerous extremes to which prejudice can be carried if allowed to control government actions. With uncommon perception, the President saw that the retention of mid-20th century of the discriminatory barriers signified the maintenance of a springboard and the preservation of a target for destruction. So I will now briefly quote from the editorial notebook, the New York Times, November the 10th, 1987. The article is a review of the recently published book, And the Band Played On, by Randy Schultz. So I quote, "And the band played on applies withering hindsight to society's shortcomings, almost none to its excesses. It," this is the book, "overlooks the scientific feat of identifying the AIDS virus and developing an antibody test, achieved in record time. It gives no credit to the equality striking social achievements. Most Americans have so far refused to panic in the face of a terrifying disease, or to oppress the barely tolerated minorities that are its focus." The New York Times, Sunday, November the 15th, 1987, in an article entitled "Estimates of AIDS Cases Rises," states, "Geneva, November 14th, Reuters, the World Health Organization has raised its estimates of AIDS cases throughout the world by 50% and says finding a vaccine may take longer than experts thought. Halfdan Meyer, the organization's director general, painted a bleak picture at the start of the conference on acquired immune deficiency syndrome, which destroyed the body's ability to fend off disease and is always fatal. My scientific sources tell me that a vaccine may be even further away than we thought a year ago, and development of therapeutic agents has been frustratingly slow, he said. Mr. Mayer said available evidence indicates that the virus is continuing to spread and the number of AIDS cases climbs steadily. The health agency estimates that 5 to 10 million people in the world are carriers of the human immunodeficiency virus, which caused AIDS, but have not as yet developed the disease. Does that sound familiar? So, a quote here by Neely Fuller, 1971. Some of you may know this, Neely Fuller Jr. He says, if you do not understand white supremacy, racism, in brackets, what it is and how it works, everything else that you think you know, or everything else that you think you understand will only confuse you. It is by Neely Fuller Jr. in 1971 from his book, The Textbook for Victims of White Supremacy Racism. Another quote here, if you attempt to understand the AIDS epidemic or the AIDS Holocaust without understanding white supremacy, what it is and how it works, you will only be totally confused and you may be dead. If you attempt to understand the Holocaust of Semites or the war against the Semites of the Jewish religion in Europe from 1933 to 1945 without understanding white supremacy, in brackets, racism and anti-Semitism, you will only be bewildered and totally confused, which is another quote by Francis Cress Welsing. Another quote here, if you attempt to understand the killing of homosexuals in Germany under the leadership of Adolf Hitler without understanding white supremacy and what it is and how it works, again, you will only be confused. If you attempt to understand biological and chemical warfare without understanding white supremacy, what it is and how exactly it works, you will only be completely confused. If you attempt to understand the killing of gypsies, meaning people out of Egypt in Germany, under the leadership of Adolf Hitler, without understanding white supremacy, racism, you will only be confused. Anyone who has not mastered an understanding of Germany under the leadership of Adolf Hitler and the Holocaust of Semites from 1933 to 1945, wherein 12 million Semites of Jewish religion were slaughtered under conditions of mass deceit and deception. But with the awareness of other Western, translate Western means white, powers such a person cannot possibly understand the AIDS Holocaust of 1980 to 1991, wherein 50 to 75 million deaths of black people on the continent of Africa and elsewhere has been planned and projected. So she's talking about the AIDS epidemic, AIDS pandemic. In the size of the lie, there is always contained a certain factor of credibility. Since the great masses of people will more easily fall victim to a great lie than to a small one, since they themselves lie sometimes in little things. Thus, such a untruth will not only enter their heads, therefore, just for this reason, some part of the most impudent lie will remain and stick. Let me repeat that, read it one again. This is a quote from Adolf Hitler. In the size of the lie, there is always contained a certain factor of credibility. Since the great masses of people will more easily fall victim to the great lie than to the small one, since they themselves lie sometimes in little things, thus such an untruth will not at all enter their heads. Therefore, for this reason, some part of the most impudent lie will remain and stick. Adolf Hitler, the psychopathic god. What is past is prologue, and that's a little quote there from William Shakespeare. So I continue. George Santayana, American philosopher, who has left to prosperity the challenge, I quote, "Those who do not know history and do not learn from history will repeat it." The word Holocaust is defined in this paper as the massive planned slaughtering, in brackets, by whatever necessary means decided upon, close brackets, under conditions of major deception of a people classified as non-white, conducted by people who classify themselves as white, for the specific purpose of depopulation of non-white people under the specific conditions of the white supremacy domination. White supremacy is here defined as a local and global behavior, power system consisting of patterns of perception, logic, thought, speech, action, and emotional response, whether consciously or subconsciously determined, as practiced in all areas of people activity, which are, in brackets, economics, education, edutainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, and war, close brackets. Practice against people classified as non-white by people who classify themselves as white, for the specific and ultimate purpose of white genetic survival on the planet Earth, a planet whereupon the overwhelming vast majority of people are black, brown, red, or yellow, referred to by the whites as non-whites. All of them are genetically dominant in terms of skin coloration, compared to the genetic recessive white skin people, who can therefore cause potentially white genetic annihilation. All information, all events, all data that are not placed in a proper context, establish precise relationships, is only nonsense and nonsensical. Nonsense, however, because it deceives and causes confusion, can be used for deadly purpose. Much of the discussion heretofore about AIDS, that's the acquired AIDS immune deficiency syndrome, much of the information which has appeared in the electronic media and in the newsprint about AIDS is experienced as largely nonsensical in increasing numbers of people, especially black people. In this area of the world, and indeed throughout the world, including the areas of the world referred to as the United States of America, that thus far has the largest number of documented cases of infection with AIDS virus, but also in Africa as well, the area of the world with the largest number of projected deaths. Most disturbing and the most nonsensical of the obsessive insistence upon the part of people who classify themselves as white that black people in Africa cause the spread of AIDS virus throughout the world from their continent, from their contact with the African green monkey, the vernet. There's a page. I think the monkey is called the vernet monkey. My effort through the presentation of this paper will therefore be to place the discussion of AIDS in what I consider to be its only proper logical context, in an effort to neutralize much of the nonsense that has developed around this topic in the past 5 or so years throughout the world. AIDS is a deadly disease that after its sudden appearance has already killed thousands of people. The projection of that it will kill many, many thousands more, indeed many millions, by neutralizing and cutting through the nonsense which presently surrounds the discussion on AIDS. It is hoped that many lives around the world will be saved for a more logical approach to this epidemic and now pandemic disease state. From 1933 to 1945, Germany, a leading country in the Western civilization, under the leadership of Adolf Hitler, and with the assistance of politicians, doctors, lawyers, professors, judges, scientists, and the general population, conducted open warfare against and planned the extermination of Semites of the Jewish religion who were citizens of Germany and other countries of German occupation in Europe. As persons who were referred to in Germany and throughout Europe as Semites, they were not considered to be white people or Aryans. As Semites, they are considered to have their genetic roots amongst Africans, black people on the continent of Africa. Indeed, the word Semite is derived from the Latin prefix semi, which means half. Semites were the products of the genetic mixture produced when their white, Greek, and Russian soldiers invaded Africa and raped African women, who were of course black. Semite is the same as the word mulatto. Thus, they were considered to be half black and half white, or genetically colored people. Thus, a yellow-colored star was placed on the outer clothing by the German government in the Hitler era. The terms anti-Semitic and anti-Semitism meant most fundamentally and still mean anti-colored people and anti-people who are classified as non-white by white-skinned people, even when those non-whites have lost much of their skin coloration in some instances. Semites who left Africa and eventually entered and attempted to settle in Europe were further miscegenation with the white-skinned people on the continent of Europe and continue to lose much of their melanin skin pigmentation. However, because of the dominant character of African or black genotype, which means the genetic type, genotype, included hair texture and the type of facial features, there continue to exist evidence of African or black genetic heritage. Because of the dominance of Africans and black genetic heritage, genetic recessive white-skinned people of Europe continue to fear white genetic annihilation because of the Semites. Excuse me while I just change my glasses. So this is the Afrocentricity Bookman Show. This is Brother Jegna reading the book called Our Story. We are reading the chapter by Dr. Francis Cress Welsing, who is speaking about white supremacy white domination and the AIDS pandemic. And it's kind of strange because what she's saying now is kind of linked to what is happening now. Because some people, and I'm one of them, believe that the pandemic was just not a random thing. This disease spread so fast and so powerfully, it seems to be maybe man-made. That's why it's so virulent. And the thesis of Dr. Frances Cress Welsing is, she said when she saw that people who classify themselves as white, killing non-white people willy-nilly, remember the slave trade, the American, indigenous American people were wiped out to get America, people of Australia wiped out, the people of the Caribbean completely wiped out, the people of Tasmania wiped out. She wondered why they could wipe out people like this. And then she noticed that in the USA, for example, when they lynch people during slavery, after slavery, they lynch people during Jim Crow, segregation, black people were lynched. But during that lynching, she noticed that they would always attack the genitals of the people. They'll cut off the genitals of the black man. And she says that didn't happen for history. Why they cut off the genitalia of the black man? And through her study, she says the only reason why they could attack the genitals of the white person may be linked to Europeans who traveled all the way around the world and noticed that 90%, 95% of the people around the world had color. And the Europeans realized then that they were actually the minority of the world. They like to call people minorities in the countries that they dominate because it makes them more powerful. These people are minority, yeah? But when you look at the world as a whole, people who classify themselves as non-white, Europeans, also called Western, are actually the minority of the world. So she said, because I went around the world and saw that they are a minority, they realized that because people with melanin in their skin, their genes are dominant, and people with white genes or white skin, their genes are recessive. She says that white people could be wiped off the planet just by people with melanin having sexual relations with white women. Because the only way you get white women is by a white man and a white woman having relationships. But any other intermixture, whether it's a yellow skinned person, a red skinned person, brown skin or black skinned person, having sexual relations with a white man or white woman, the child will not be white. And she says, well, if you want to look the fear and why they attack black people or people classified as non-white so much is that whether it's conscious or unconsciously, is due to their fear of genetic annihilation. And she said that will make sense. That's why they attack the genitalia of people, particularly black people. So she's saying that when you look back now at the Holocaust of the European Jewish people between 1933 and 1945, she's saying that in their minds, they see the Jewish people as non-white people, and non-white people have to be wiped out because they could cause their genetic annihilation of white people. And this is really Dr. Frances Cress Welsing's thesis. And when you see in the USA what happened to that brother, the policeman knelt on his neck, it's the same consciousness that created the USA, which is the same consciousness which made them kill that black man in the street. That they've created in their mind the view that a black person is a threat. But how can a black person who is handcuffed, lying on the floor, surrounded by 3 or 4 or more police officers still be a threat? And this is because, according to Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, and many, many people believe this, is that he can still cause the genetic annihilation of white people, even though he hasn't got a weapon. Because his genes is his weapon. Because his genes are dominant. And this is really the thesis of Dr. Francis Christ Wellsing. Why do white people just kill other people of color like it doesn't matter? They don't lose sleep over it. It's because of whether it's conscious or unconscious. He is conscious of some people, because I remember that guy called Dylan Roof, who went into a church in South Carolina and killed the black people in the church. He made comments like, remember he wrote down some of the things he believed. He wrote down comments like, "You're attacking white women." And there's no attacking of white women. And one of the people, I think that guy who massacred those people in Australia, went into the mosque and killed the people. He had a diatribe. We're talking about that. They feared of their annihilation. So there is a belief that these people believe that there's a fear, there's a danger, and if they do not protect themselves and do not protect the white woman, then they could be genetically wiped out. And I think that is the fear which is the European mind. So when you see the AIDS epidemic, she said it's a continuation really of what the Nazis under Adolf Hitler did in Germany. There's something about it, there's a fear of the non-white. Public Enemy made a record, or made an album, and the album was called The Fear of a Black Planet. And it really comes from the teachings of Dr. Francis Christ Wellsing that they fear a planet of color, because if they do not protect themselves, will not exist in the future. And that is where we are really, yeah? So when you understand this sort of concept of white supremacy, then you'll understand what is happening in the world. If you do not understand white supremacy, everything else you think you do understand will only confuse you. And this is really the teaching of Dr. Francis Christ Wellsing, who got that notion from Neely Fuller Jr. Excellent. So let me continue now. So this is the Afrocentricity Book Show. We are reading a book called Our Story. And we're reading a chapter by Dr. Francis Christ Wellsing. And the chapter is called The White Supremacy System and the White Supremacy Mindset and the AIDS Holocaust. So let me go on. However, because of the dominant character of Africans or the black genotype, this genetic type, including hair texture and a type of facial features, there continue to exist evidence of African or black genetic heritage. Because of the dominance of African or black genetic heritage, genetic recessive white-skinned people of Europe continue to fear white genetic annihilation caused by the Semites. Thus, there was a 2,000-year history of white hostility towards Semites and coloreds of the Jewish religion on the continent of Europe, in spite of short periods in which the hostility of whites towards the Semites was less intense. Following Germany's loss of World War II, following Germany's loss of World War I and the major decline of the German economy, causing amongst the German people a sense of extreme and profound dislocation and vulnerability, latent hostility began to escalate towards the Semites, the people who were long recognized as being able to cause white genetic annihilation because they carried the dominant black genetic material from Africa. Although it had been much diluted over a 2,000-year period. And let me just say, when you read what the Jews did, if you ever read about Hitler, what's going on, even these TV shows on the TV shows, documentaries made, was published on the TV. They did say that after the First World War, Germany had a lot of poverty there. And obviously they wanted to blame people for their loss, and they started to blame the Jewish people. They blamed partly the USA as well, but they partly blamed the Jewish people because they said that it is a bluish conspiracy. So this was whipped up even by German philosophers over a period of time, and then in 1935 it exploded again under Hitler. That they said these people, we need to get rid of these people. That's why the German Holocaust happened. You must remember, for us as African people, the Holocaust happened in Germany was an argument among white people. Nothing to do with African people. Is an argument amongst white people. Before the Holocaust happened actually in Germany, they started to sterilize black people in Germany. So this would agree with the teachings or the research of Dr. Francis West Welsing, because they found black men in Germany and sterilized them before they started to put Jews in the camps and in the gas chambers. And this is all documented. So clearly there's a thing. Why are you sterilizing black men? So there's clearly a fear of non-white dominant recessive material. So it does all seem to add up, yeah, the teachings, yeah? Okay, and the behavior in the USA as well. Behavior in the USA. What many people don't know, after the Second World War, the USA, the Russians and the USA, obviously the two major superpowers then, when they captured and arrested German prisoners of war, they took the scientists. The Russian took scientists to Russia, and the USA took scientists, German scientists, to the USA. So much of the teachings from this Nazi state went to Russia, went to the USA. Because obviously the USA wanted to have the technology for, well, excuse me, they took many of the scientists for the rocket technology, but obviously they took scientists who were carrying out this genocide. So a lot of the teachings from Nazi Germany went to the USA. Not saying it wasn't there already. Remember, the Ku Klux Klan was there from 1900s, yeah, turn of the century. Enslavement. These people were Ku Klux Klan, even if it wasn't called that yet. So the hatred of non-white people has been in the psyche of these people for so long. In fact, the first time that white was classified as a people was the British in Virginia, in the so-called USA. So before there was an American state, the British had colonies there, and Maryland was one of them, and they passed a law, I think like 1640s, saying that a white race must have certain privileges and other people must not have privileges. So the concept of this white supremacy or white mindset came from the British, and this is all documented. They passed a law in Maryland in the 17th century, and this is, they said, white people must have certain powers and prerogatives of other people. And we are where we are today. The killing of black people started this time. That white people, whether they knew at that time that they had to travel around the world and saw that non-white people were minorities, the concept of this white race type thing is inbred in these people. And as the president of the USA said, and I'm trying to find a quote there, she made a quote from the president of the USA, and he said, President Truman said, Hitler's persecution of the Jews did much to awaken Americans to the dangerous extremes to which prejudice can be carried if allowed to control government actions. I think that says it all. Because clearly, extreme racial prejudice has been allowed to cover much of the Western government actions. And in the USA, who have we got in president now? And who are his followers? Remember when Donald Trump stood up and said, the Mexicans, they're rapists and they're drug dealers and we need to keep them out. The Ku Klux Klan sent out information to their followers, said, vote for Trump, he's our man. So this sort of mindset is very strong. Unfortunately, because it hasn't been controlled, you can see the effects on my young brother who was kneeled on his neck. Why are you kneeling on someone's neck who's not causing you any danger? He's handcuffed, lying on the floor, surrounded by 3 or 4 or 5 policemen. But psychologically, the threat's still there because he's got dominant genes. And this is the Francis West Welsing thesis. I'll continue. The world word Holocaust is defined in this paper as the massive planned slaughtering, by whatever necessary means decided upon, under conditions of major deception of people classified as non-white, conducted by people who classify themselves as white, for the specific purpose of depopulation of non-white people, under the specific conditions of white supremacy domination. White supremacy is here defined as a local and global behavior power system consisting of patterns of perception, logic, thought, speech, action, and emotional response, whether consciously or subconsciously, determined as practiced in all areas of people activity, which are economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, and war. Practiced against people classified as non-white by people who classify themselves as white, for the specific and ultimate purpose of white genetic survival on the planet Earth. A planet whereupon the overwhelming vast majority of people are black, brown, red, and genetically dominant in terms of skin coloration, compared to the genetic recessive white skin people who can therefore cause potentially white genetic annihilation. All information, all events, all data that are not placed in a proper context, establishing precise relationships, is only nonsense and nonsensical. Nonsense, however, because it deceives and causes confusion and can be used for deadly purpose. Much of the discussion heretofore about AIDS, much of the information here has appeared in the electronic media and in the newsprint about AIDS, is experienced as largely nonsensical and increasing numbers of people, especially black people. In this area of the world, and indeed throughout the world, including the areas of the world referred to as the United States of America, and that thus far has the largest number of documented cases of infection with the AIDS virus. But also in Africa as well, the area of the world with the largest number of projected deaths. So why would the USA early on have the most deaths of AIDS? Or at least the most documented cases of infection of AIDS? They said that AIDS was created by a green monkey in Africa, so why would the USA have the greatest amount of infections? That doesn't seem to make sense, does it? The first person to die of AIDS was a US soldier who was injected with a smallpox vaccine, allegedly, and he dies of AIDS. This is the first person in the world who died in the USA. So let me continue. Most disturbing and most nonsensical is the obsessive insistence on the part of the people who classify themselves as white that black people in Africa cause the spread of AIDS virus throughout the world from their contact with the African green monkey, the vernet monkey. My effort through the presentation of this paper will therefore be placed in discussion of AIDS in what I consider to be its only proper and logical context, in an effort to neutralize much of the nonsense that has developed around the topic in the past 5 or so years throughout the world. AIDS is a deadly disease that after its sudden appearance has killed thousands of people. The projection is that it will kill many, many more thousands, indeed many, many millions, by neutralizing and cutting through the nonsense which presently surrounds the discussion on AIDS. It is hoped that many lives around the world will be saved through a more logical approach to this epidemic, now pandemic, disease state. From 1933 to 1945, Germany a leading country in the Western civilization under the leadership of Adolf Hitler, and with the assistance of politicians, doctors, lawyers, professors, judges, scientists, and a general population, conducted open warfare and planned extermination of Semites of the Jewish religion, who were citizens of Germany and other countries of German-occupied Europe. As persons who were referred to in Germany and throughout Europe as Semites, they were not considered to be white people or Aryans. As Semites were considered to have their genetic roots amongst African, black people on the continent of Africa. Indeed, the word Semite is derived from the Latin prefix semi, which means half. Semites were the products of the genetic mixture produced when white Greek and Roman soldiers invaded Africa and raped African women, who of course were black. Semites is the same word, same as the word mulatto. Thus, they were considered to be half black and half white, or genetically colored people. Thus, a yellow-colored star was placed on the outer clothing by the German government in the Hitler era. The terms anti-Semite and anti-Semitism meant most fundamentally and still mean anti-colored people, or anti-people who are classified as non-white by white-skinned people, even when those non-whites have lost much of their skin coloration. In some instances, Semites who left Africa and eventually entered and attempted to settle Europe were further miscegenation, that means mixing of the people, with white-skinned people in the continent of Europe, continued to lose much of their melanin, skin pigmentation. However, because the dominant character of African or black genotype, including hair texture, type, facial features, they continue to exist evidence of African or black genetic heritage. Because of the dominance of the African or black genetic heritage, the genetic recessive white people of Europe continue to fear white genetic annihilation caused by the Semites. Thus, there was a 2,000-year history of white hostility towards Semites and coloreds of the Jewish religion on the continent of Europe, in spite of short periods of which this hostility of whites towards Semites was less intense. Following Germany's loss of World War I and the major decline of the German economy, causing amongst the German people a sense of extreme and profound dislocation and vulnerability, latent hostility began to escalate towards the Semites, the people who were long recognized as being able to cause white genetic annihilation, because they carried the dominant black genetic material from Africa, although it had been much diluted over a 2,000-year period. It is to be noted here that the most fundamental of all vulnerabilities is genetic vulnerability, meaning white genetic vulnerability or white annihilation. Hostility against the Semites intensified, even though the Semites themselves sought to identify with and be accepted as white people. They wanted to be Germans and other Europeans, but they were told they were Semites, even if one parent was white, or even if it married a white Aryan. Hostility was still also directed against gypsies, who were also darker skinned people, who were the very name means out of Egypt. Hostility was also directed against the homosexuals because of the logic of white supremacists and Adolf Hitler. They represented a weakness on the part of white Aryan male, who was already feeling vulnerable. Adolf Hitler, who came to power in Germany in 1933, began the most highly sensitive and forceful articulation of that deepest and most fundamental of all fears of the global and local white collective, namely the fear of white genetic annihilation as caused by people classified as non-white. Indeed, it can be said that Adolf Hitler was the highest crystallization of the white supremacist mindset, the mindset based on the fear of white genetic annihilation, and the companion thought of white genetic survival by any necessary and conceivable means. Hitler, because he tapped into the deepest and most fundamental fear, was thus able to have the support and sympathy of masses of other people who, like himself, classified themselves as white. Then as well as now, they understood Hitler's call as a conscious as well as a deep subconscious level for white genetic survival. This is the perceived threat that the Semites of the Jewish religion residing in Europe represented to Germans and other European whites. Hitler and his followers referred to the Semites as Tiermensch, and it's German for subhuman. Amongst many other horrendous accusations, he significantly accused them of carrying disease, causing disease. Indeed, Hitler referred to the Semites as being viruses, which is very interesting. From the book, The Psychopathic God, Adolf Hitler, by Robert G. L. Waite, I quote. So this is a quote from the book, The Psychopathic God, Adolf Hitler. Towards the end of February 1942, just after the Wallasey Conference, which organized a final solution to the Jewish problem, Hitler listed himself among the great benefactors of mankind who had isolated generous disease germs. The discovery of the Jewish virus is one of the greatest revolutions that has ever taken place. The fight that we are carrying on is of the same nature as that waged by Pasteur and Koch during the last century. How many diseases have their origin in the Jewish virus? We shall retain our health when we eliminate the Jew. Hitler further accused the government to which preceded his own, the Weimar Republic, of surrendering to German nations, to the civilization by Jews and Negroes. Very interesting there. Quote by Hitler. Hitler said he accused the government that he took over from was the Weimar government, Weimar Republic. Hitler further accused the government which preceded his own, the Weimar Republic. Weimar is spelled W-E-I-M-A-R. The Weimar Republic, of surrendering the German nation to civilization by Jews and Negroes. And thus Hitler's pattern of perception and logic, the white supremacy mindset, the mindset of white genetic survival, he planned for the extermination of Semites as the final solution to the problem of white genetic survival by getting rid of the source of white genetic annihilation. Through a monstrous pattern of lying and deceit, promoting the big lie, through a very sophisticated governmental propaganda apparatus, it was projected and propagated that the Semites were the source and cause of all of the problems that threatened the German and European nations. Excuse me. And thus, mass-level destruction was planned against the Semites. This process was participated in by all of the facets and levels of the German and European society. Adolf Hitler's leadership of Germany from 1933 to to 1945 in the war against the Semites of the Jewish religion has now become the standard for the ultimate conduct of governmental and state white supremacy. As the war against Semites was a war that was won by Adolf Hitler in 1932, the year before Adolf Hitler came to power in Germany, in the United States of America, in Tuskegee, Alabama, another destruction was being conducted against people who are classified as non-white, by people who classify themselves as white, doctors, scientists, and governmental officials. This planned destruction was the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. From 1932, no, my apologies, from 1932 to 1972, 50 years, 40 years. A total of 40 years, the United States Public Health Service, working at various times with the Alabama State Department of Health, the Macon County Health Department, the Tuskegee Institute, the Veterans Hospital in Tuskegee, and private physicians in and around Macon County, deliberately planned to withhold treatments from more than 400 black men who were suffering from syphilis. And let me say, there's evidence that they actually injected these people with syphilis as well. They didn't have syphilis there. There's evidence that they actually gave some of them syphilis. Suffering from syphilis, it was even verbalized that the program would be a means of getting rid of black people in the United States. Please note, the deception was just ended under pressure in the year 1972. So from 1932 to 1972, there was a program to withhold medication which could have got rid of syphilis within the poor, I must say, community there, black community. So they allowed these people with syphilis to live, have sexual relations with other black women, and they were not treated for 40 years. So they had some major medical condition problems. They were told that there was being tested because they had bad blood. There's a book called Bad Blood about this whole Tuskegee syphilis experiment. The book is called Bad Blood. So these poor people, some of them illiterate, were told by these white doctors, came in there in their white coats, oh yeah, we're just testing your blood, don't worry about it, no problem. But these people had syphilis and they allowed them to stay with the syphilis, and there was testing to see what syphilis did to the body. But also on another level, they was looking out for the destruction of black people, allowing the disease which could kill them, and the disease they could spread around by having sexual relations, and they did nothing for 40 years. I mean, we're told that doctors take a Hippocratic oath. But how can we take a Hippocratic oath I do apologize. We just got cut off there for a moment. Some issues with the phone. So as I was just saying that the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, the AIDS spreading pandemic across the world, Adolf Hitler wiping out the European Jews, 1935, 1933 to 1945, according to Dr. Francis Welsing, and according to anybody who can see, it's all the same. They're getting rid of people who are judged to be maybe not white. Anyway, let me continue. Very shortly after, the disease, which is now referred to as AIDS, began to surface in the area of the world referred to as the United States of America, the population being focused upon as being infected with the AIDS virus were first the white male homosexuals. So AIDS spread in the USA first of all among the people classed as white homosexuals, and subsequently black and Hispanic people, non-white people. More specifically, the projected source of the virus was said to be an African people who had been bitten by the African green monkey, or the verdet monkey. In his 1969 book, published by the Monthly Review Press entitled A Survey of Chemical and Biological Warfare by John Cookson and Judith Nottingham, the book is described on its cover as follows. Derived, in quotes, derived from a 3-year study conducted by the British biochemist and geneticist and British political scientists, the text affords a comprehensive review of materials used and policies adopted by the authorities in the USA and Canada, Great Britain and West Germany. It also states that it provides one of the most comprehensive views on the subject of chemical and biological warfare written for the layman. The authors, who are well qualified, produced a vast amount of documentation of the use and research on these types of weapons, that is, biological and chemical. On page 322, bottom of the page, it states, the question of whether new diseases could be used is of a considerable interest. Vervet monkey disease, African green monkey disease in brackets, may well be an example of a whole new class of disease-causing organisms. Handling of blood and tissue without precaution causes infection. It is unaffected by any antibiotic substance, so far tried, and is unrelated to any other organism. It causes fatality in some cases and can be venereally transmitted to man. Excuse me. In other words, Dr. C.E. Gordon Smith said it has possible potential as an infectious disease of man. It presumably is also a biological warfare interest. New diseases are continually appearing. Chikungunya and onyonyon fever, for example. In addition to these are the possibilities of virus and bacteria being genetically manipulated to cause new organisms. Shall I repeat that? It has possible potential as an infectious disease of man. It presumably is also of biological warfare interest. New diseases are continually appearing. The chikungunya and onyonyon fever, for example. In addition to these, there are the possibilities of viruses and bacteria being genetically manipulated to produce new organisms. On page 110 in the same book, bottom of the page, it states, I quote, just recently, a great deal of useful work has been done on the vervet monkey disease. The African green monkey disease, which caused 7 deaths in Germany. Reports of progress were, I quote, sent to 40 laboratories all over the world, 9 of these have been supplied with effective material and anti-sera vaccine. 4 in the USA and 1 each in Germany, Panama, South Africa, Uganda, and the USSR. A non-effective complement fixing antigen has been prepared to the WHO, World Health Organization, reference laboratories. And this is in 1968. Hansard. Hansard, what's Hansard? Hansard is the documentation of everything that's ever been said in the House of Commons. They have miles and miles and miles and miles of documents of everything ever said in the Houses of Parliament. Hansard. And that was a quote from Hansard 1968. Just recently, a great deal of useful work has been done on the vervet monkey disease, the vervet African green monkey disease, which caused 7 deaths in Germany. Reports of progress were sent to 40 laboratories all over the world. 9 of these have been supplied with ineffective material and anti-sera, so this is vaccines, 4 in the USA and 1 each in Germany, Panama, South Africa, Uganda, and the USSR. A non-effective complement fixing antigen has been prepared by the World Health Organization. And this was published in Hansard 1968. So 1968, there was no AIDS. But it speaks about them. A great deal of work has been done around the green monkey. And then all of a sudden in the 1980s, there's the AIDS disease, which came from someone being bitten by the green monkey. But since the 1960s, these nations have been working on biological and chemical warfare weapons. See, the evidence is there. So when we look around the world today, are there any links? Time will tell. In yet another book called A Higher Form of Killing, The Secret Story of the Chemical and Biological Warfare by Robert Harris and Jeremy Paxman. And we know Jeremy Paxman because he's a very well-known UK journalist. Hill and Wang, publishers, 1982. On page 219 of the book, Secret Story of Chemical and Biological Warfare, it says, the claims continued in January 1978. A correspondent with Reuters news agency reported from NATO's headquarters that scientific experts had informed him that the Russians were developing 3 horrific new diseases for warfare. Lassa fever, which according to the sources kills 35 out of every 100 people it strikes. Ebola fever. Remember, this is 1978. Ebola fever, which kills 70 out of every 100. And the deadly Marburg fever, green monkey disease. Over and over again, the name of the African green monkey shows up. Not, however, biting Africans and causing disease, but as the developed source of biological warfare laboratories amongst people who classify themselves as white. This, however, is denied and blamed. And blame is projected on African black people, the non-white people. Adolf Hitler propagated his big lie against the Semites of the Jewish religion, which became his pretext for the planned slaughter of 11 million people, in which he actually succeeded in killing 6 million. All in the name of white supremacy, racism, anti-Semitism, for the express purpose of white genetic survival, to prevent white genetic annihilation. In the late 1980s, when there has been grave concern throughout the entire world and also amongst the white-skinned people in the area of the world referred to as the USSR, that the white birth rate is declining. And as the birth rate of all of the non-white people continues to increase, it is now at this time that we witness the sudden appearance of the disease of AIDS, primarily affecting black, non-white people in Africa and in Haiti. Just as in the case of Germany under Adolf Hitler, white male homosexuals were attacked first. We know many of the details and names of the person who were directly involved in the Holocaust, of the Semites, of the Jewish religion. However, at the time that these events were occurring, everything was under the massive deception of the big lie. As truth always surfaces, in time we will know the full details of the massive deception and cover story of the AIDS Holocaust when this now current big lie is unveiled. So that is the end of our book, our story. So if we think about what's happening in the world today, are there any links, similarities, consistencies we can see? Again, time will tell. But all we can do as African people is protect ourselves. And we do not want to accept any vaccines because it was the vaccine, smallpox vaccine, brought to Africa under the guise of ridding Africa of smallpox, which infected Africans with the AIDS virus. This was reported in the London Times, 1987. Documented, the London Times, 1987. So we've got about 45 minutes left. So let me continue. So I've got a book here. It's called Menticide. I'm going to start a new book. It's by Walimu K. Bomani Baruti. Walimu K. Bomani Baruti, Menticide and Other Essays. So the first chapter is called Menticide. He's got a quote here from Marcus Garvey right at the top of the page. This chapter is called Menticide. Nobody frees a slave. A slave must free himself. That's Marcus Garvey. I continue. Bobby E. Wright, one of our wisest ancestors, defined menticide as a form of insanity that leaves many of us thinking out of the mind of Europeans as if it were our own, which is very powerful. That is very powerful. Bobby E. Wright, one of our wisest ancestors, defined menticide as a form of insanity that leaves many of us thinking out of the mind of Europeans as if it were their own thoughts. It is the state of being psychologically brain dead and having one's thoughts replaced by alien ones. A state akin to being a zombie. Menticide is derived from the root word menta, meaning mental or thinking, and side, meaning to kill. Menticide means to kill the mental processes. To kill one's normal thought process, essentially, is to kill one's own mind. In that, there is still a thought process at work. Menticide also means an artificial alien collection of thoughts and a way of thinking that have replaced what has all been altogether suppressed or removed. Nana Wright, of course, was specifically referring to Africans under domination of white global supremacy. He explained that menticide is a genocidal strategy which turns a people against themselves. in the service to those who are working to destroy them. Excuse me 1 minute. Okay. Because they have been thoroughly convinced that their destroyer's love and appreciation is critical to their humanity in this reality as well as their salvation in the next. They seek to make alliances with their destroyers in order to be close enough to prove themselves worthy of their elusive love and therefore to be released from their pain. Shall I repeat that? This is people with menticide now. Because they have been thoroughly convinced that their destroyer's love and appreciation is critical to their humanity in this reality, as well as their salvation in the next, they seek to make alliances with their destroyers in order to be close enough to prove themselves worthy of this elusive love and therefore to be released from their pain. So that's phrase there. They seek to make alliances with the destroyers. What comes to my mind? Have you heard of this ADOS people? I'm sure many of you have in the United States. American descendants of slaves. So they're linking their origin to enslavement. I'm not a descendant of a slave. I'm an ascendant of African great civilization. I'm an ascendancy. I'm not a descendant of a slave. How come the oldest people on the planet of the earth, the people who were around for 70,000 years, nobody else around, only them, now want to call themselves an American descendant of a slave? That is their origin. It shows you the psychological problem. So this is called menticide. Clearly the people of ADOS are trying to make alliances with destroyers in order to be close enough to prove themselves worthy of their elusive love and therefore be released from their pain. So why are they in pain? If you are the victim of menticide, your concept of yourself has been destroyed. So the concept of yourself they've inserted into you, because it's false, it's so painful. But even though it's false, they believe it's true because menticide is in place. Their mind has been destroyed and they're believing the untruth. They believe the untruth is reality. But in order for us to free ourselves, we have to deal with reality. But this sounds like an excellent description of the ADOS people. They are trying to assimilate with the people who are destroying them and who has destroyed their mind. And your mind must be destroyed if you're trying to make alliances. Because the Jews during the Second World War make alliances with the Nazis when the Nazis are trying to destroy them. I think the answer will be no. So why would these ADOS people try to make alliances with the people who want to destroy them? I continue. They come to see their enemy as having the preponderance of power, in brackets, to change the nature of the severely imbalanced intergroup relation, and as being superior by God-given right. These vanquished individuals see each other as enemies, while their true enemy is looked upon as the ultimate friend. A confusion their enemies has created in their psychology. Whoa. Does that not describe the ADOS mindset to a T? They come to see the enemy as having a preponderance of power and as being superior by God-given right. These vanquished individuals see each other as enemies. Why do I say that? I do apologize. I'm having problems with the phone. I think the memory's been a bit full up, but we'll keep on going. These vanquished individuals see each other as enemies while seeing their true enemy as looked upon as their ultimate friend. Does that explain ADOS? Yes, it does explain ADOS. Because ADOS are attacking Africans who they see as not coming from the USA, through the slavery in the USA. So if you come from the Caribbean, you come from Africa, you come from South America, they're attacking these people as not foundation people. Attacking them, they hate us, they hate our culture, they hate Martin Luther King. They're driving a wedge between Africans. When they just killed that young brother, our brother in the street the other day, did they care if he was from the USA? Did they care if he was from Haiti, Jamaica, Nigeria, Ghana, South Africa? Only we like to make a distinction. But the enemy of black people know exactly who we are. So this description is the description of the ADOS people. These vanquished individuals see each other as enemies, while their true enemy is looked upon as their ultimate friend. A confusion their enemy has created in their psychology. So why is it looking at people's friend? Their strategy, ADOS strategy, is to go to the Democratic Party in the USA to seek reparations. So basically, they're going with their begging bowl and attacking other Africans. I think that was an excellent description of menticide. Nana Wright makes it clear, though, that menticide is only possible when the oppressor controls or exercises a significant amount of power over resources and ideology, politics, mission of those institutions. Educational, religious, economic, familial, political, media, and that are fundamentally essential to the survival of the group they work to destroy. The oppressor must control those institutions which teach the oppressed what and how to think. Without this control, they could not be effective in turning a group against itself. Sadly, menticide is most often the undetectable psychological illness, except in the case of some of the more vocal Negroes, because the victims seem to be normal. Like their European psychopathic racist counterparts, they eat, sleep, converse, drive, play, and do just about everything else without drawing any special attention to themselves. They publicly act and appear to think as most other persons who look like them, but privately, driven by their psychosis, they look at the world quite differently than they would if they were slightly even aware that Africans are Europeans' prey and that they are African. That was quite deep. They publicly act and appear to think as most other persons who look like them, but privately they are driven by their psychosis and mental sickness to look at the world quite differently than they would if they were given even slightly aware, if they was even slightly aware that Africans are Europeans' prey and that they are African. Menticidal Africans find every possible excuse to forgive Europeans for what Europeans continue to do to them, mentally and physically. It is almost as if they believe that their salvation is based on how much punishment they can receive, and they forgive and forget those who so easily play with them like powerless tyrants. But even more importantly, they do not even recognize Europeans as predators. They fantasize about the love of the enemy that will not love them. They lack the basic understanding that no one loves a fool. There may be pity, but never respect or appreciation. No one respects the loser who chases after the winner, begging him to kick, spit on him some more. Self-hatred results from learning to be ashamed of one, and or hating one's own story, one's own tradition, one's own people, one's own self. I'm going to repeat that. Self-hatred results from learning to be ashamed and of hating one's own story, one's own traditions, one's own people, or one's own self. Self-hatred. We cannot separate our self-esteem from our people because we cannot avoid the fact that we are the culmination of our ancestors. Just as European children today are the culmination of their ancestors. Without those before us, we would not be. We are because we are. Therefore, we are them. We respectfully suffer their pain, so we will come to know it as ours, and are righteously sworn to obtain justice in their name. Whether conscious or not, treason against one's ancestors is the worst possible sin an individual can commit against itself. And that is exactly what the people who choose to ignore or dismiss the significance of the past on the present do. The very purpose of history is to give a people a collective framework or of common sense out of which to build the present and design their future. Menticidal individuals see their first priority as dismissing any interpretations of history, except that given to them by the European-controlled media and system of miseducation, i.e. the European mind. Any interpretation of the historical facts that cause their love of the enemy into question is summarily rejected, regardless of the source. Integration, amalgamation, disintegration into the European is the primary mission of vanquished Africans. And vanquished Africans are menticidal. For reasons of psychological survival, such individuals choose to believe our story is an irrelevant notion that in no way, shape, or form, fashion impacts on their thinking or state of being today because they look closely at yesterday will disturb the comfort of their mental today. That's pretty big there. Because to look closely at yesterday would disturb the comfort of their mental side today. It would force them to act against their true love, the European ideal, something they are afraid to do. But most of all, because menticidal individuals know deep in their lost minds that Europeans will destroy them for no reason, in brackets, ironically, a conclusion they have gathered from our story, they have internalized a paralyzing fear of Europeans that makes them continuously evaluate their every thought and behavior based upon what Europeans would find acceptable. Because this confusion consumes most of their mental energy in order to feel normal, a valued participant in a so-called free society. They are driven to turn life into a playground that removes any desire for a serious study of our story, or our historical, ongoing, bloody relationship that exists between Europeans and Africans globally. Yes, to preempt psychoplantic, apologetic objections of Negroes, Europeans do occasionally injure some of their own, but pain is not pain. What they do to those who are their family members is in no way comparable to what they do to us. Racially brain-dead Africans see Europeans as family, as nuclear family, as allies and dear friends. Reality is a creation of those who dominate the dominant culture. I'll repeat that. Reality is a creation of those who dominate the dominant culture. To those who say we need to get over what's done to us, I say it is still being done to us. Often without willing permission, because so many of us blindly see our enemies as our friends. By far, the best example of this today is our imprisonment at their hands. Just as male and female Africans were disproportionately forced to live behind bars during our official period of physical enslavement in the North and South, we are disproportionately incarcerated in this land and in every other European-dominated land today. What is worse is that, unlike in the past, there are now also more Africans than European males behind bars. The criminal system that captures, prosecutes, and confines them is working very hard to also put more Africans than European females in the same predicament. This is not our historical accident. It has been a steady, progressive assault against us that spans our contact with them in this place. What is most troubling about this systematic genocide, in brackets, a person permanently removed from her communities is effectively dead, is that so many of us support the legal mandates of European societies that make this possible. We make it possible for them to easily, and with a clear conscience, remove our warrior class as a threat to them. Understand that most severely abused children honestly believe that their parents love them. In their desperate attempts to bring out the love of those who should naturally love them, many even actively seek this abuse in an effort to gain some form of attention from those that they love. In their confusing love with hate, most adults abused by their spouses and mates feel the same way. It is no different from mental Africans at the hands of Europeans. But in all these cases, contradictions is blatantly evident. You do not abuse people you truly love. And applying the European psychobabble that abuse of a significant others is caused by absence of love of self is irrelevant. That's the same oppressive, loving logic that our ancestors enslaved suffered as much as they did. Only a mental slave would prefer his or her pain over his or her enslaver. Only a masochistic feels for his torturer. In our oppressor's loving menticide, we are supposed to feel for the judge who sentenced one of our sisters to prison because she was having a marital or family problems. I doubt if the sister held captive would care. We are supposed to pity rednecks who lynch our brothers from trees, the backs of pickup trucks, and in prison cells because their level of intelligence keeps them from getting whatever job we have. Our concern should be for the victim, not the victimizer. It should be with us, not with them. Remember Steve Biko's words. The most potent weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. Let me repeat that, I'm sure you know this quote. Steve Biko's words. The most potent weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. We have been socialized to see Europeans as deserving our sympathy, as being ignorant of the crimes they continue to commit against us, of needing to catch them, or to teach them morality by serving as their whipping post until their exhaustion causes them to pause and momentarily think about whether they are misbehaving or not before continuing. To accept their self-serving propaganda as menticidal and genocidal, they are killing us with our consent. It has been said that the devil's greatest advantage lies in making people believe he doesn't exist. But whether you believe in the devil and he's dwelling or not, hell has no monopoly on evil. On this planet, however, Europeans do. It is only through the media and our belief in their truths, speech marks, that they have been able to separate evil from themselves as a distinguishing characteristic and make it into a human trait. It is mental-sidal to believe that we are equal, in brackets, or that they are worth being equal to, simply because we have accumulated some meaningless trinkets, have a daily share of the crumbs from the master's table, and have some of the master's children who psychologically and materially benefit from the oppression and exploitation. In brackets, whether they are consciously aware of it or not, close brackets. Who are willing to play with us or let us into their sandbox? A lack of knowledge about the effects of our story or intergroup and interpersonal relationship on this very day, at this very second, allows others to exploit us in any way they please, usually because our ignorance and ready dismissal of our story makes us think that our destruction is our idea. So that's the first chapter of Menticide. Very powerful, I think you will agree. And I think all black people need to read that chapter, understand. And it is an excellent description we've seen of this sort of ADOS concept, ADOS movement in the USA. I'm going to finish, but we've got about 20 minutes left. So I'm just going to read the introduction. Yeah, I went to the first chapter called Menticide. Let me just read from the introduction here to give. So this is a book called Menticide. I'll continue to read it next week. And it is by Walimu K. Bomani Baruta. Introduction. The Akan say when a soldier ant scatters, they are not lost. But we are lost. We are not lost. We are like soldier ants, mobilizing our deepest thoughts, resources, and energies for battle. These words are my contribution to frontline thinking. They are not intended to bring our scattered warriors home. For now, although our motherland is in the African continent, our homes are where we are now. Our mission are where we are now. We have not rebuilt what we need to return to. We have not completed our assigned mission. These words are partly for those warriors who are confidently doing their work, who have made the decision to be on our front line, who have no internal political challenges, no doubts about winning, or frustrations about the abundance of insanity among Africans around them, but who appreciate and feed off of thoughts strongly akin to what they already feel and know. However, many of us are not all so lucky or clear-minded. Menticidal clutter blocks the self-assurance most of us need to righteously stand. So, at the same time, the words in these essays are for those of us who are in the heat of battle, but who occasionally need to reaffirm that other damaged, healing warriors still standing on. These thoughts are also intended to motivate and give guidance to those who have strayed so far and for so long from the real active battlefields that they have lost sight of any battle or never knew a war was raging all around them. They are for those who have desperately embraced forgetfulness, so they may find reason to reconnect to the spirit of their caged righteous rage and again walk in the footsteps of their ancestors. This book is about Isfet and Ma'at, which respectively reflect our compromised condition and African-centered solution. Let me just say, Isfet means chaos. excuse me, Isfet means chaos and Ma'at means peace and justice. For Africans, Isfet means a state of decline, devastation, degeneration into white death. The essays meant aside common sense, Eurasian, leaving them for the wolves and the hunt is on, death wish, without sanctuary, gender, confused voice of African manhood, lies, lies and more lies, high treason, self-serving spirituality and thought, word, deed, reflect state of being. Isfet represents the principle of lies, justice, disorder, imbalance and disequilibrium, selfishness, wickedness, and immorality, to name a few. It's collective anti-family, anti-nature, and anti-life, anti-spirit imperatives. The Ma'atian essays, on the other hand, symbolize our return to blackness, godliness, our reascension into our traditions. In other words, our re-Africanization. Ma'at speaks to truth, justice, order, balance, reciprocity, righteousness, and moral integrity, to name a few of the universal principles in this family. The essays, the game, the Sappho, groundings with my daughters, vision, deliver the world, Nana, John Henry Clark, gratitude, and independently African speak to this possibility. We must always move towards the African way, regardless of the pendulum's momentarily movement in the other direction. This book is for and about Africans and our Africanization. Some may wonder why there are discussions of Isfet at all, in that they tend to focus on European thought and behavior. There is a simple and logical explanation. Africans in European society, subject to the whim and socialization of imperialistic, dominative European culture, tend to internalize and exhibit European thought and behavior. Most are unaware of their general cultural contradiction and resultant confusion. Most do not know the source of their menticide and incessant, internally motivated and driven corruption. They neither know the European nor their victimization by them. To see into their menticide and corruption, they must see inside the mind of the European. They must go to the source and cure the disease. Only equipped in this way can they freely, knowingly choose to be African. For the same reason, the essay Speaking to Ma'at focuses on positive, progressive African thought and behavior. As we must know that to discard, we must know where to find our true self. Repeat that. As we must know what to discard, we must know where to find ourselves. That which is African is our origin. It is our mother. It is our spiritual, mental, and physical base. It is our vision. It can be no true exercise of power, knowledge of self, knowledge of one's people, of one's essence. As we move along this transformative path, however, we must train ourselves to think rightly. In this off-kilter world, to knowledgeable and wise are self-taught. Our analysis and conclusions must be logical, and they must be African, politically African. We must be able to recognize our truth and other lies, or at least their statements which applies to them and not us. And we must be in position to constructively criticize whatever information, knowledge, and wisdom that faces us in all cities. So let me repeat these last two paragraphs again. For the same reason, the essay Speaking to Ma'at focus on positive, progressive thought and behavior, as we must know what to discard. We must know where to find our true selves. That which is African is our origin. It is our mother. It is our spiritual and mental physical base. It is our vision. There can be no true exercise of power without knowledge of self, i.e., knowledge of one's people and of one's essence. As we move along this transformative path, however, we must train ourselves to think rightly. In this off-kilter world, the knowledgeable and the wise are self. Our analysis conclusions must be logical and they must be African, politically. We must be able to recognize our truth and other lies, or at least their statements, which apply to them and not us. And we must be in a position to constructively criticize whatever information, knowledge, or wisdom that faces us to do this. So I'm going to leave it. Continue reading Metaside next week, which is an excellent book. So have a great week. Stay safe, and we'll meet again. Yeah, then.